In the heart of Montana's frozen wilderness, a wolf chained for 7 long years paced endlessly in the shadows. Her eyes, fierce and wounded, told a story of survival against impossible odds. Most who crossed her path faced snarls and fangs, until one man dared to step closer. What drove him to risk it all? And why did this wolf, feared by many, respond to him in a way no one expected? Stay with us as we uncover a journey of heartbreak, resilience, and an extraordinary bond that would change lives forever.
The Montana winter howled through bare branches, carrying with it the bitter memories of loss that had driven Tom Parker to this desolate place. Standing at the end of a muddy driveway, his breath forming clouds in the February air, he couldn't help but remember the wolf pup he'd failed to save last spring. A rescue gone wrong that still haunted his dreams. 20 years of wildlife rehabilitation had taught him that not every story had a happy ending, but that particular failure had nearly broken him. The anonymous tip had come 3 days ago, crackling through his sanctuary's emergency line at 3 a.m. A wolf, they said, chained behind an abandoned property just outside of Livingston. Tom had almost ignored it. These calls often led nowhere, and after losing his daughter Amy to cancer just 2 years ago, he'd grown weary of facing more heartbreak. But something in the caller's voice had compelled him to act. Now, through the rust-pitted chain-link fence, he saw her. A massive gray wolf, her coat so matted and filthy it was almost black in places, pacing an endless circuit carved into frozen earth by years of dragging a logging chain. The metal links had worn a collar of raw flesh around her neck, and her shoulders bore the twisted evidence of growth stunted by constant weight. But it was her eyes that caught Tom's attention. Yellow orbs that held such profound suffering that he felt his chest tighten with recognition. He'd seen that same look in Amy's eyes during her final days, when the pain had become too much to bear. "I wouldn't get any closer if I were you," warned Sheriff Mike Hawkins, a man Tom had known since high school, now gray at the temples and carrying the weight of too many similar cases in the slump of his shoulders. "That one's got a body count, Tom. 3 attacks last year alone. 1 victim nearly lost an arm." Tom nodded, but his focus remained fixed on the wolf. He'd seen enough abuse cases to recognize that her aggression stemmed from something deeper than natural wildness. This was learned behavior, born of systematic cruelty that made his stomach turn. "Previous owner called her Bella," Mike continued, his voice tight with barely contained anger as he consulted his notepad. "Marcus Reynolds, real piece of work, running an illegal exotic animal breeding operation. We found evidence of at least 12 other wolves that—" He trailed off, but Tom could read between the lines. He'd seen the aftermath of such operations before. Shallow graves and broken bodies, the discarded evidence of human greed. 7 years, Mike added, watching Bella pace. "That's how long she's been here. Got her as a pup, probably no more than 8 weeks old. Used her for breeding until she started attacking the handlers. After that, they just left her here, chained up and forgot about her." Tom unlatched the gate, its hinges screaming protest into the winter air. The sound made Bella whirl, lips pulling back from yellowed fangs in a snarl that spoke of years of learned hatred. But Tom had buried his daughter, had watched his marriage crumble in the aftermath of that loss, had faced his own demons in the bottom of too many whiskey bottles. Fear had lost its hold on him long ago. "Hey there, beautiful," he said softly, letting his voice carry across the yard. The words were the same ones he'd used with every rescued animal, the same ones he'd whispered to Amy during those long nights in the hospital when pain kept her awake. Bella's growl deepened, but Tom noticed something crucial. She was backing away, not charging. This wasn't aggression. This was terror wrapped in fur and fong. The next 5 hours became a careful ballet of trust and patience. Tom sat in the frozen mud, just beyond Bella's chain range, talking quietly about everything and nothing. He told her about his sanctuary in the Gallatin Valley, about the other wolves he'd rehabilitated, about Amy's love for animals and her dream of becoming a veterinarian. A dream cut short at 16 by an aggressive form of leukemia that had devoured her from the inside out. As the winter sun began its early descent, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Tom knew he had to act. Bella's condition was worse than he'd initially feared. Beyond the obvious wounds, her breathing was labored, and her movements suggested internal injuries that needed immediate attention. "I'm going to help you," he promised, reaching slowly into his jacket for the tranquilizer gun. Bella's reaction was immediate. Her body tensed, yellow eyes fixing on the weapon with a knowledge that spoke of previous encounters. The betrayal in her gaze as the dart found its mark cut Tom deeper than any physical wound could have. "I'm sorry," he whispered as she fought the sedative, her legs finally buckling beneath her. "This is the last time anyone will ever hurt you." The words felt hollow, echoing the same promise he'd made to Amy before her first round of chemotherapy, another promise he hadn't been able to keep. The following weeks at Tom's sanctuary became a blur of veterinary visits and setbacks that tested his already fragile hope. The physical damage was extensive: severe muscle atrophy, malnutrition, infected wounds that refused to heal, and internal scarring that suggested years of abuse far worse than they'd initially suspected. But it was the psychological trauma that proved most challenging. Bella refused food for the first 2 weeks, snarling at anyone who dared approach her enclosure. Tom took to sleeping in a chair outside her fence, reading aloud from Amy's favorite books, worn copies of Call of the Wild and White Fang that still bore her margin notes in fading pencil. His ex-wife Sarah, who still helped run the sanctuary despite their divorce, thought he was pushing himself too hard. But she recognized the look in his eyes, the same desperate need to save something that had driven him during Amy's illness. The breakthrough came on a bitter March morning, when dawn painted the snow in shades of pearl and rose. Tom had fallen asleep in his chair, an empty bottle of bourbon testimony to another night of fighting old ghosts, when a soft whine drew him back to consciousness. Bella stood at the fence, not growling for the first time since her arrival. In her mouth, she held one of the stuffed animals they'd left in her enclosure, a worn wolf plush that had belonged to Amy. "Well, hello there," Tom managed, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. Bella dropped the toy, nudging it toward the fence with her nose. The gesture was small, but to Tom, it felt like the first ray of sunlight after an endless winter. Progress came in fits and starts after that day. Bella began accepting food from Tom's hands, though she still snapped at other handlers. She allowed the veterinarian to approach without sedation, but only if Tom remained constantly by her side. The wild fear in her eyes slowly gave way to something else, a cautious trust that reminded Tom of Amy's expression when she'd finally understood that her father, despite all his failures, had never stopped fighting for her. Sarah, who ran art therapy sessions for veterans at the local VA hospital, was the first to notice Bella's unusual reaction to visitors. The wolf, typically wary of strangers, would press herself against the fence whenever Sarah's therapy groups toured the sanctuary. She seemed particularly drawn to those who carried visible wounds, both physical and emotional. "She sees herself in them," Sarah observed one evening, watching as Bella tracked the movements of a young veteran who had lost both legs to an IED. "She understands what it means to be broken." The observation sparked an idea that would eventually transform both the sanctuary and Bella herself. Tom had never considered using a formerly aggressive wolf in therapy work. The risks seemed overwhelming. But as he watched Bella's interaction with the wounded veterans, he remembered how Amy had always insisted that animals could sense pain in others, that they possessed a capacity for healing that went beyond human understanding. They began slowly, with carefully controlled visits. Their first participant was James Martinez, a Marine veteran with severe PTSD who had attempted suicide 3 times since returning from Afghanistan. Like Bella, James carried wounds that went far deeper than flesh. The first time he sat beside her enclosure, something extraordinary happened. Bella, who still kept her distance from most humans, approached James directly. She lay down beside him, separated only by the fence, and maintained eye contact as he began to speak. James, who had barely spoken in months of traditional therapy, talked for hours about the war, about the friends he'd lost, about the guilt that haunted his dreams. And Bella listened, occasionally pressing closer when his voice broke with emotion, offering a presence that demanded nothing but gave everything. "She doesn't judge," James explained later, wiping tears from his face. She just understands. Like she's been through hell too and came out the other side. The success with James led to a structured therapy program that would eventually become known as Bella's Legacy. Working with local veterans organizations and trauma centers, they began offering regular sessions with Bella. The wolf who had once attacked out of fear now seemed to have found her purpose, helping others heal from wounds similar to her own. But tragedy wasn't finished with them yet. In the program's third month, they lost James to suicide. The news hit Tom hard, reopening old wounds and making him question everything they were doing. He found himself spending nights in Bella's enclosure, sharing his grief with the only creature who seemed to understand the depth of his pain. It was during one of these nights that Sarah found him, drunk and crying, with Bella's head resting in his lap. Instead of judging, she sat down beside them, and for the first time since Amy's death, they truly talked. About their daughter, about their divorce, about the weight of failure that had driven them apart. And through it all, Bella remained, her presence somehow making it safe to finally face their shared grief. The program continued, evolving as they learned from both successes and failures. They began working with children who had suffered abuse, with first responders struggling with PTSD, with anyone who carried wounds too deep for words alone to heal. Bella seemed to have an uncanny ability to sense who needed her most, often becoming agitated when a participant was close to crisis, allowing the staff to intervene before tragedy could strike again. By the end of her first year at the sanctuary, Bella had worked with over 100 clients. Children who had retreated into silence found their voices while sitting beside her. Veterans who couldn't bear to be touched learned to accept comfort from her gentle presence. Even those who initially feared wolves found themselves drawn to her quiet strength. Tom documented everything, working with researchers to study the unique bond between a formerly aggressive wolf and trauma survivors. The results were remarkable. Participants in Bella's therapy sessions showed significant improvements in anxiety levels, depression symptoms, and social interaction. But more importantly, they found hope, something Tom himself had nearly lost after Amy's death. 5 years after her rescue, on a crisp autumn morning, Tom sat in Bella's enclosure, watching the sunrise paint the Montana sky in shades that reminded him of Amy's favorite watercolors. Bella lay beside him, her head resting on his leg, her coat now healthy and thick, though the scars of her past would always remain visible. "You know," he said, scratching behind her ears, "when I first saw you in those chains, I thought we were saving you." He smiled as Bella shifted, pressing closer to his side. "Turns out you were saving us too." The sanctuary had grown, largely thanks to Bella's story. They now hosted regular programs for veterans, troubled youth, and trauma survivors. Each person who came through their gates found something different in Bella's presence: understanding, acceptance, or simply the quiet comfort of being with another soul who had known profound suffering and found a way to transform it into healing. Sarah had taken to calling it Bella's gift, this ability to connect with those who were hurting. Tom preferred to think of it as Amy's legacy, living on through every life they touched. The wolf who had known nothing but chains for 7 years had become a bridge between pain and healing, helping others break free from their own invisible restraints. On Bella's 7th anniversary at the sanctuary, they hosted a memorial service, not just for Amy, but for all those they'd lost along the way. James Martinez's family came, bringing with them his military medals and a letter he'd written about Bella before his death. Jenny Thompson, a teenager who had found her voice again after months of silence following family trauma, sang a song she'd written about healing. Michael Chun, an elderly veteran who credited Bella with helping him finally speak about his experiences in Vietnam, read a poem about second chances. As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Tom watched Bella move along the fence, greeting each familiar face with gentle recognition. The logging chain that had once bound her, now preserved as a reminder in his office, seemed like a relic from another lifetime. In its place was something far stronger: bonds of trust and healing that connected Bella to every person she had helped, and through them, to something greater than individual survival. The sun was setting when the last visitors left, casting long shadows across the sanctuary. Tom sat with Bella in her enclosure, as he had countless times before. She was older now, her muzzle touched with gray, but her eyes held a wisdom that spoke of pain transformed into purpose. "You're a miracle," he told her, running his hand through her thick fur. Bella looked at him with those knowing eyes, and in them, Tom saw a reflection of everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. In that moment, he understood something profound about healing. It was never just about surviving the pain. Sometimes, the deepest healing came from helping others find their way back to light. The story of the wolf who was chained for 7 years became more than just a tale of rescue. It became a testament to the resilience of the spirit, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that sometimes, the hearts we help mend end up healing our own in return. Through Bella, countless people had learned to trust again, to hope again, to heal. As night fell over the Montana sanctuary, Bella's howl rose clear and strong into the darkening sky. It was no longer the cry of a trapped and fearful creature, but a song of freedom, of healing, and of hope. And in that song, Tom heard echoes of all they'd lost and all they'd gained. Amy's laugh, James's courage, the countless tears and triumphs that had brought them to this moment. Through Bella, they had all learned that some chains, once broken, give way to something far more powerful, the unbreakable bonds of love that transform both the healer and the healed. The lasting legacy of a wolf who proved that even the most wounded heart could become a source of healing for others. 10 years after Bella's rescue, the sanctuary had grown into something beyond Tom's wildest dreams. What had started as a single wolf's journey of healing had blossomed into a nationally recognized trauma therapy center. The old chain-link fences had been replaced with modern enclosures, and dozens of rescued wolves now called the sanctuary home. But none had quite the same impact as Bella. On her 10th anniversary celebration, a surprise visitor arrived, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the oncologist who had treated Amy during her final months. She had been following Bella's story through news articles and social media, seeing in it echoes of the lessons Amy had taught them all about resilience and unconditional love. "Your daughter would be proud," Elena told Tom, watching as Bella worked with a group of young cancer patients from the local children's hospital. She always said animals could heal in ways humans couldn't understand. Looks like she was right. The program had evolved far beyond its initial scope. They now worked with medical schools, studying the physiological effects of animal-assisted therapy on trauma survivors. Research papers documented the Bella Protocol, a unique approach to trauma treatment that combined traditional therapy with carefully structured interactions with rehabilitated wolves. But perhaps the most remarkable development came through their work with prison rehabilitation programs. Inmates who participated in the wolf rehabilitation program showed significantly lower recidivism rates, finding in the animal's journey from trauma to healing a parallel to their own path toward redemption. Marcus Reynolds, the man who had chained Bella for 7 years, became an unexpected part of her story. After serving his sentence, he reached out to Tom, asking to see the wolf he had once abused. The meeting was carefully arranged, with every precaution in place. What happened next became sanctuary legend. Bella, now elderly but still regal, approached her former tormentor with neither fear nor aggression. She simply sat at the fence, watching him with those wise yellow eyes as the man broke down, sobbing out apologies for years of cruelty. That day, Reynolds became an advocate for animal welfare, traveling to schools and community centers to share his story of transformation. Sarah and Tom found their way back to each other through the work at the sanctuary. Their shared mission of healing had slowly rebuilt the bridges grief had burned. They remarried in a small ceremony in Bella's enclosure, with the wolf as their only witness, her presence a reminder that sometimes love requires losing everything to find its way home again. In her final years, Bella's impact continued to grow. The sanctuary established the Amy Parker Memorial Fund, providing support for families dealing with childhood cancer. The therapy programs expanded to include international training programs, teaching others how to replicate their success with traumatized animals and humans alike. When Bella finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 15, the outpouring of grief came from around the world. Hundreds gathered at the sanctuary for a memorial service that celebrated not just a wolf's life, but the countless lives she had touched. Veterans stood alongside former inmates, cancer survivors beside trauma victims, all united by the thread of healing this remarkable wolf had woven through their lives. Tom buried her beneath Amy's favorite oak tree, the same place where they had scattered his daughter's ashes years before. The old logging chain was fashioned into a memorial sculpture, its links transformed into a symbol of breaking free from the past, of finding purpose in pain. But Bella's story didn't end there. The sanctuary continues her work, guided by the principles she taught them, that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds, that trust can be rebuilt even after the worst betrayals, and that sometimes the most profound transformations come through helping others find their way back to light. Today, visitors to the sanctuary are greeted by a simple plaque that bears Bella's image and the words that became her legacy. Some chains are made of metal, others of memory and pain. But with love, patience, and understanding, all chains can be broken. And on quiet nights, when the Montana wind whispers through the pines, those who listen closely might hear an echo of a wolf's howl, not a cry of pain or loneliness, but a song of healing, hope, and the enduring power of love to transform even the most wounded hearts into instruments of healing. In the end, Bella's greatest gift wasn't just the lives she helped heal, but the reminder that within every broken spirit lies the potential for transformation. Her journey from chained captive to healer became a beacon of hope for all who struggle to break free from their own invisible chains, proving that sometimes the most profound healing comes through helping others find their way back to wholeness. The sanctuary still stands today, a testament to one wolf's incredible journey and the ripple effect of compassion. Each year, thousands come seeking healing, and though Bella is gone, her spirit lives on in every life touched by her legacy, in every chain broken, in every heart healed. For in the end, her story teaches us all that the measure of a life isn't in the wounds we carry, but in how we use those wounds to help others heal. And in that truth lies the most powerful medicine of all, the knowledge that even our deepest scars can become bridges to healing, not just for ourselves, but for all those who follow in our footsteps on the path to redemption.